Today on the official Marvel podcast, we're celebrating the release of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again with executive producer Sana Amanat.
The thing to remember is that it's been 10 years since that first show came out. People have grown up, things have happened. And so what we were excited about is how do you tell that story?
Plus, we've got a deep dive into the comic book history of Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin.
And you'll want to stick around after that to hear from the man behind the Kingpin himself, Vincent D'Onofrio.
I'm Victoria Ying.
I'm Sade Spence.
And this is the official Marvel podcast.
If you're anything like us, you're probably still reeling from Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again's incredible 2-episode premiere.
And while we're insanely excited to get into it all, we're giving everyone a chance to catch up before we start answering your burning questions about the show.
So, starting next week, we'll be breaking down the first 2 episodes of Daredevil Born Again with the cast and crew of the show. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out.
Speaking of the cast and crew, we have a few joining us today. And to kick things off, I got to chat with executive producer Sana Amanat. Hi, Sana. So glad to have you. So will you tell us a little bit about your career with Marvel and Marvel Studios?
Yeah, obviously always great to be on the official Marvel podcast. I've been at this company now for 15 years, and I started as a comic book editor many eons ago at this point, and had some really great experiences with artists and collaborators and writers that I loved. And then my career started shifting into development and animation. And then eventually I got to the studio and started working on live action content where I am today. And now I'm a executive of production and development at Marvel Studios, otherwise known as just a Marvel producer.
That's amazing. It's so cool that you touched so many different aspects of the Marvel universe and the different mediums. Can you tell us a little bit what the development process for the show was like?
It's always been a bit of an adventure. We've had so many different challenges, obviously, between the pandemic and then we had the writer's strike and all of that. And so the development on this show was really interesting because we're really excited about bringing Daredevil, properly into the MCU. You had him in Spider-Man. And initially, the story was going to lean heavily more into sort of lawyer Matt Murdock. And then, of course, Fisk is there. You're going to see a different version of Fisk in New York. That was always the premise of lawyer Matt Murdock, Fisk in this sort of new position in New York. And so as we started digging into the creative, we're really realizing a lot of the stuff that the original iteration of the show did really well, we wanted to pull a lot more of that into our show. And that's really what we started digging into is how do we make sure we are continuing to tell that story? Obviously, we're going to tell it through a different lens. We're going to tell it from a different perspective with different creators to an extent. But Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio, are those characters. And what people are going to be excited about is the two of them together. And so we kind of reframe the story to be able to tell it from that perspective. These two formidable opponents who are in a weird way so similar. They're in a very different phase in their lives. They're both trying to overcome different aspects of their alter egos. They're both probably in denial, but they've put away their masks, quote unquote, both of them at the start of this. And so we thought that was a great way in, and that's really what we started doing, and brought in Dario Scardapani, our showrunner, and Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who've done Loki for us and Moon Knight for us. And so just, again, that combination of creators really understood the importance of the old show and loved it as much as I loved it. And we wanted to create an extension of that, but still have our own take on it. The thing to remember is that it's been 10 years since that first show came out. People have grown up. Things have happened. And so what we were excited about is how do you tell that story? How do you tell the story of 10 years later since, Charlie put on that suit, since Matt Murdock put on that suit for the first time, who are these people now? I think that story was really interesting to tell, considering all of the baggage and all of the very serious events that have happened before.
What we've seen previously of Daredevil is high stakes action sequences mixed with scenes that reflect on morality, motivation, and justice. What is the tone being set on Daredevil Born Again?
I think it's still that, very much so. I think we have that combination. I think we might be doing it a bit differently than the old show, mainly because you have different directors and different filmmakers and all of that. But 100%, I think that was what made the show so special, is that you had these really impactful emotional scenes, yes, like about morality, about the concept of, flawed, violent characters. That is an important component of our show. And, what's interesting about this iteration is we are talking a bit more about violence and the power it has over these individuals, right? And like hating that power and yet succumbing to that power. And that is really sort of, I think, the way in for us. Like, we're going to have moments, of course, of intense violence and intense action sequences, of course, but there is those dramatic moments of Matt restraining himself from it, right? Because a line was crossed, as they say. And what does that mean for who Matt Murdock wants to be now? I think that's really important. What does that mean for Fisk in this new position when he's returned to New York? More powerful than ever in a lot of ways. He has to also be different. They're both trying to be different individuals, but also as they're living their day-to-day lives and they're attempting to be these different people. That is where a lot of the emotion, tension, and drama is going to live. So I'm happy with the balance we found. So it was a really awesome experience, and I feel like I'm really happy with the way season 1 turned out.
Can you talk a little bit about the return of this cast? And what was it like seeing them reunite on set?
Yeah, it was so awesome. We were able to bring back Deborah Ann Wall and Eldon Henson to play Karen Page and Foggy Nelson, and of course John Barenthal to play Frank Castle. It was awesome to see them all together in different ways, because for me, I was a part of sort of, the old show in some capacity because they were all my colleagues making it. So I'm very entrenched in the classic show in many, many ways, but still I was a fan, right? Ultimately, I'm always going to be a fan of the characters, but especially the show. So for me, just as a fan, just sitting back and seeing them engage and talk to one another was really sweet.
Were there any particular comics that you reference as part of the creation of these characters or plotlines?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like Chip Zdarsky and Charles Soule's run on the Mayor Fisk runs that they've had, like respectively, was a big part of it. They had some really cool characters and that Chip introduced, and also the Mayor Fisk run that Charles Soule did was definitely the starting point for us. We will always forever be inspired by Ed Brubaker and Brian Bendis's various runs on the character in terms of tone. Frank Miller, of course, is always going to be the foundation of every Daredevil story that we write. We're not doing an adaptation of Born Again by any means. At the same time, though, I will say there's a lot of thematic similarities to what is being said in Born Again in terms of Matt Murdock being stripped away and being forced to kind of find himself. And of course, the overarching power of Wilson Fisk. There's a lot in there that I feel like from a theme standpoint still works, but we've kind of looked everywhere. There's like little bits of Mark Waid's runs with Chris Samnee. So again, I worked on the comics. I'm a big Daredevil head, so we try to pull from different people as much as possible. We are definitely keeping more of that darker, grittier tone that Bendis and Brubaker did and Frank Miller did, though.
How do you stay faithful to the source material while keeping it interesting for a television medium?
I think you can answer this question for any of our characters, frankly, because we all know very well that like the source material, the comics, that's our holy grail always. I mean, obviously, as a former comic book editor, it will always be my holy grail because it starts there. And we have such a strong understanding of our characters. But we manipulate them on the page, right? You have Frank Miller's version of Daredevil, and then you have Mark Waid's version of Daredevil. And I think that range is so intriguing to me because our characters are constantly evolving. But we know at the end of it, it's what these characters, who they are and what they represent and what they stand for. And Matt Murdock being someone who is a contradiction, who is someone who looks for justice in any capacity. And whether that means he's going to be wearing his lawyer suit or whether that means he's going to be putting on his Daredevil suit, he is going to be fighting for justice. He'll do it through the court system. And if he can't get it through the courts, he's going to put on that suit and he's going to use his baton and fists, right? Which in itself is maybe problematic, but I think that's what makes him such a captivating character, is because his belief system is very rigid. His belief is, I am going to find justice and I'm going to protect my city. And so understanding that at the core of it, I think makes it still true to both forms. And also understanding that people believe that in our everyday lives. We want to be able to find justice and we want to fight for it in any means possible. And the same thing with Fisk. I think what's so intriguing about him and what I find him to be the best villain possible is that his background as someone who has a very tragic story with his father and his mother, it does ground him in a different way. And it does showcase that he has something to prove, that he will sort of, every single time you replay it, he's constantly beating his father to prove that he is the most powerful and he will not be taken down. And I think that pathos makes him one of the most intriguing villains and also makes him unstoppable, because in some weird ways you kind of root for him to win, even though he's a terrible person and ultimately, but there is that relatability. So again, I think, what is the internal compass of these characters? Like what is the North Star, which we use a lot. We reference that terminology a lot, but what is the North Star for both of these characters and how do you stay true to that? I think that's how you don't worry too much about warping them in an adaptation if you know what that is.
This is another TVMA rating for Marvel Television, following Marvel Television's Echo. How will you be pushing the boundaries in this series?
Well, there's some crazy events that happen towards the end of the season. I think, the action is what the action is. Like, we wanted to show the brutality of both of these characters, and you will see that. We didn't want to glorify the violence by any means. Like, again, these characters are pushed to the edge and they react the way that they do. And it also showcases about what happens when a city doesn't necessarily have, I guess, the darkness that exists when darkness takes over and darker forces take over. And so within that, we needed to showcase what that looked like. And so you'll see another villain like Muse who enters the story. There may be some difficult scenes to watch, but it is intentionally to say we shouldn't be happy when we see people breaking each other's bones. It's a dark, dark thing. And ultimately, it's why you want to be able to have a hero. But again, we have a much darker tone than any other project I have worked on, but certainly any other project that we've done at Marvel. And I think we really want to lean into that.
You previously were an exec on Miss Marvel. How is that experience different than working on Daredevil?
Oh my God. It's like, it is pretty night and day working on Miss Marvel, from Miss Marvel to Daredevil, I will say. I mean, aside from the fact that everyone's older, not dealing with teenagers, tonally, and it's actually pretty awesome for me because that was also when I was working in the comics. It was so fun to work on something like a Miss Marvel, or even like the Kate Bishop Hawkeye, or like even the David Aja, like that Hawkeye run with Matt Fraction and David Aja was like also super fun and different. And then I got to work on Daredevil and it was like a much darker tone. And I loved that too. Like that's kind of what I enjoy doing, but it's different. We're talking about like slushies and high school dances and like honestly cartoon animation in Miss Marvel. And here we're talking about breaking people's bones and just the darker psyche of these really problematic, flawed characters who, are so cool and so tough and so badass. But it's really night and day, but it's super fun. And I've enjoyed both of these experiences immensely. It's been great.
Do you have anything to say directly to the fans?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm so excited for this show to come out. I'm so nervous. I want people to know, and people know, hopefully some people know me by now. I've been here for so long, but I love what I do. I love Marvel. I love our characters, and I freaking love these characters. I love Daredevil. I love Wilson Fisk, and I think we put our heart and soul, and we had our challenges, of course. We had our creative challenges, and we really made I think, the best of what those challenges were. And frankly, I think it made the show better. And so we put our passion, our heart, our soul into the show, and really just hope people see that and understand that, we come to this as fans first, and then creators and producers. And I just hope that they join us for this ride and trust us and trust that we're going to make something really special, because it matters to us. And, and I have a lot of friends who've worked on the old show, and I want to do right by them as well.
Well, Sana, thank you so much for coming on to the official Marvel podcast. We loved having you, and we loved hearing about Daredevil Born Again. Thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you so much. I had a blast.
While the Kingpin returns to television in Daredevil Born Again, his current whereabouts in the Marvel Comics universe is a little unclear.
I mean, I'd probably go into hiding too if I'd been removed from office as the mayor of New York City, nearly killed by Daredevil, arrested for my crimes, and caught up in a citywide gang war that completely reshaped the underground criminal scene. Just saying.
Sade! We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Maybe we should start at the beginning for those who aren't familiar with Wilson Fisk.
Okay, good call, Victoria. Let's do it.
So let's dig into the history of Mr. Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin.
Okay, but I don't really know what we're going to talk about. I mean, what's there to say about a fine, upstanding citizen and legitimate businessman? Nothing sketchy going on there.
Oh, not at all. Except that he's probably one of the most corrupt and dangerous figures in the Marvel Universe.
And while a lot of our character profiles begin with stuff like, Wilson Fisk wasn't always a criminal mastermind, that is not the case here.
Nope. In fact, he committed his first murder at the age of 12. And by 15, he'd put together a successful enough gang of criminals to first earn the nickname the Kingpin of Crime.
That man was barely 20 when he got his first official mob job. And that was as a bodyguard for New York City mafia boss Don Rigoletto.
And it's easy to see why someone would want Fisk as a bodyguard. The dude is massive. 6'7", 450 pounds, and the bulk of that bulk is muscle, thanks to years of working out, martial arts lessons, and sumo training.
Right, so here we are. King-sized up-and-comer, Wilson Fisk becomes a personal bodyguard, a position that grants him very close access to his boss. So what does he do? He kills Rigoletto and takes over his organization.
And what can we say? Fisk is a natural at the job. He runs an incredibly successful criminal enterprise, laundering all the dirty money brought through legitimate businesses, which then also becomes successful. And just like that, Wilson Fisk is now a well-respected figure in New York high society.
That's when he meets Vanessa, the elegant, raven-haired beauty who steals his enormous beefsteak of a heart. Fisk's love for Vanessa may be the only thing that overshadows his lust for power. So the couple quickly marry and they have a son, Richard, whom they promptly ship off to boarding school because, high society.
Fast forward, and Fisk is now the most powerful crime lord, not just in New York, but possibly the world. But of course, high-profile crime means high-profile foes.
Fisk's operations are constantly hindered by Spider-Man, Daredevil, or another of New York City's hero types. Not to mention, he also has some competition in his now adult son, Richard.
Richard, going by The Rose, starts his own crime ring and seems obsessed with out-kingpinning the Kingpin. Classic daddy issues, right?
Years of this have taken their toll on Vanessa, though. She's tired of the criminal life. She's had enough, and the feud with their own son is the final straw. So she gives Kingpin an ultimatum. Leave his life of crime behind, or lose her forever.
If Kingpin leaves the business, though, his rivals would swoop in and take command of what used to be his. And that's something Fisk couldn't bear to see. So Vanessa suggests that he turn over all evidence he has against the other crime bosses to the authorities.
It's a solid plan. Unfortunately, word gets out to those other crime lords. Vanessa is kidnapped, and during Fisk's attempt to rescue her, she is seemingly killed in an explosion.
As revenge, Fisk follows through with Vanessa's plan and turns over everything he has on the other mobsters, virtually eliminating all his competitors in one fell swoop. Fisk's organization is now more powerful than ever.
But he always wants more. He craves real political power. So he puts his money behind a puppet candidate named Randolph Cherry in the New York City mayor's race. Daredevil finds out that Cherry is secretly on Fisk's payroll, but he's too late. Cherry wins the election.
He also finds out that Vanessa is alive, with no memory of who she is. Daredevil promises to return Vanessa to Fisk, but only if Cherry turns down his mayoral win, which he does. And while Fisk is elated to have his wife back and recovering, he's angrier than ever at Daredevil.
So he hires the deadly assassin Elektra to kill the pesky hero. But when Elektra realizes that behind the mask, Daredevil is actually her old boyfriend Matt Murdock, she refuses to go through with it.
She's a better woman than I. So Fisk tries again, sending the even deadlier assassin Bullseye to take out Daredevil. But Bullseye only ends up killing Elektra.
So Fisk tries yet again with Echo, a deaf super acrobat and martial artist. Fisk gets Echo fired up for revenge by telling her that Daredevil killed her father. But Echo finds out it was actually Fisk who murdered her dad, and she turns on him, temporarily blinding him in her attack.
Things are not going to go great for Kingpin at this point. But don't worry, they're about to get worse.
Remember Fisk's son, Richard the Rose? Well, he takes advantage of his father's weakened state and organizes an assassination attempt. Kingpin survives the ambush, but just barely.
After a lengthy recovery, Wilson Fisk returns to New York, thirsty for payback. But before he can fully retake control of his empire, he is beaten once more by Daredevil, and subsequently sent to prison.
Luckily, and I'll put that in quotes, Daredevil's alter ego lawyer Matt Murdock has been framed for murder at this time. Vanessa, who is dying of a terminal illness, proves Murdock's innocence in exchange for Murdock taking on her husband's case and getting him out of prison.
Murdock is a true ace attorney, and soon enough, Wilson Fisk is a free man once more. Though he is released too late to see his wife one last time, Vanessa is already dead by the time he reaches her.
So, tragic love story over. It's back to bad guy business. No more puppet candidate nonsense. Fisk runs for mayor himself. And guess what? He wins.
And only with a little bit of voter fraud.
As mayor of New York, Fisk's main goal is to rid the city of masked heroes. He passes a slew of anti-vigilante laws, making it illegal for people like Spidey or Daredevil to operate in New York.
Meanwhile, he continues to collude with all the city's criminal gangs so they can do their dirty deeds unimpeded.
And in a final demonstration of how totally over Vanessa he really is, Fisk marries his favorite bodyguard assassin, a mutant named Typhoid Mary.
He somehow manages to make it through one whole mayoral term without getting impeached. But when it's time to run for re-election, Daredevil and friends catch him in the act of trying to use a mass mind control device to compel New Yorkers to vote for him. The Kingpin is dethroned and arrested.
He escapes, of course. He and Typhoid Mary seek asylum in the mutant island nation of Krakoa, which is populated mostly by X-Men. As a mutant, Mary has automatic citizenship in Krakoa, and as her husband, Fisk must legally be allowed to stay, whether the X-Men like it or not.
I'm guessing not. But as it turns out, when the anti-mutant group Orcus invades Krakoa, Fisk becomes a valuable ally to the citizens of Krakoa, helping many of the X-Men escape certain death. Does this mean Kingpin has turned over a new leaf?
Absolutely not. He's gone right back to his criminal ways since then. First murder at 12, remember?
What's next for Wilson Fisk, though? How much bigger can you get after being mayor of the biggest city in the country?
Well, folks, he's contemplating a run for president. Daredevil was created way back in 1964, within the pages of Daredevil #1. The hero was co-created by Stan Lee and artist Bill Everett.
And while Kingpin is often seen as Daredevil's arch-nemesis, did you know his first appearance wasn't actually in an issue of Daredevil? He first showed up in an issue of Amazing Spider-Man. In fact, Kingpin wouldn't actually appear in an issue of Daredevil until Daredevil number 107 in 1981, almost 20 years after Daredevil's debut.
It's wild to think that Kingpin wasn't on Daredevil's radar for that long.
Well, Spider-Man was keeping him pretty busy.
Since then, Kingpin has appeared in countless comics, film, and even TV shows as the man without fear's fiercest rival. And now that Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again is in full swing, we thought it'd be fun to revisit one of our conversations with the Kingpin himself, Vincent D'Onofrio.
We caught up with Vincent at New York Comic Con a few months ago, where he shared his excitement about returning to the role and how he gets into character. Let's listen.
Well, I have little things that I do, yeah. There's certain events in my life that I like to bring up before certain scenes, not all scenes, but certain scenes. I still look at the art of Kingpin's. There's a couple of particular artists who I love the way that they drew him and painted him, and it gets me in the right mood. It's amazing how the art can help.
One particular piece of art that helps Vincent D'Onofrio is the cover of Daredevil number 117 by Marko Djurjevic. It's from 2009, a comic book he received as a gift from his Daredevil co-star Charlie Cox.
Fisk is in a long coat and we're facing each other. That portrait has an incredible vibe to it. They look like freaks, lonely freaks, and a bit broken. And that helps a lot. Things like that help a lot. It's funny to play a king. Like, it's a different type of role than any other part when you're really playing like a king that nobody says no to, that everybody, is nervous about what their next move is going to be, like it's different than playing other parts, because particular things happen after a while where you start, as if you were really a king, you start to take for granted the way scenes are put together, the way other actors are acting around you, the way you're reacting to other actors. It all becomes very kind of natural in a way, like 3 episodes into a season. And that whole thing about walking into a room and being the center of attention as the king, it's kind of fun, and you get used to it in such a strange way where so it helps me, that whole thing helps you play the character. I really like it.
You can catch Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin in Daredevil Born Again, streaming now only on Disney+.
While we've talked about the first appearances of Daredevil and Kingpin in Marvel Comics, today we're celebrating another comic book milestone, one that actually came before both of them. On March 5th, 1963, Janet Van Dyne, aka The Wasp, made her debut in Tales to Astonish number 44. Janet Van Dyne started as a socialite and fashion icon, but quickly became a hero in her own right. After an alien tragically murdered her father, she turned to Hank Pym for help, a scientist who her father trusted prior to his death. At first, Hank, who was secretly Ant-Man, dismissed her claims as a prank. But when his insect allies confirmed Janet's story, he decided to investigate. Impressed with Janet's strength and determination, Hank revealed his secret identity to her and offered to make her his partner. Janet accepted, and with the help of Pym's shrinking formula and implanted synthetic cells that gave her wings, she became the Wasp, fighting alongside Ant-Man and ultimately avenging her father. Since then, Janet Van Dyne has been a founding member of the Avengers and a part of teams like the Defenders, West Coast Avengers, Agents of Wakanda, and more. Beyond her superhero career, she's also been president of Van Dyne Industries, board member of Neville Industries, a mother, an adventurer, a screenwriter, a hardware store clerk, and so much more. And while her style has evolved through the years, her dedication to helping others has never wavered. Girl boss.
Next week on the official Marvel podcast, we'll not only answer your biggest Daredevil Born Again questions, but also hear from the cast of the show themselves.
Until then, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode.
And be sure to leave us a review. It really helps others find the pod.
This episode was hosted by Victoria Ying and myself, Sade Spence.
Our producers are Jasmine Estrada and Anita Flores. Additional writing by Christopher Healy.
Thanks to our Senior Manager of Audio Production and Development, Brad Barton, and Production Manager, Emily Godfrey.
Mixed by Ry Dorsey.
Theme music by Ida Akbal.
Executive producers are Larissa Rosen and Jesse Berger.
Thanks so much for listening, you guys. See you next week.